I came home with grease still on my hands, a half-wrapped Steinway action in the back of my van, and a headache from tuning a cracked pin block for 3 hours straight. I opened the door expecting the usual, Marcy yelling at the dog, Jenna blasting that same overproduced indie garbage upstairs. But instead, I walked into silence. They were both sitting there, not standing, not moving, like they'd rehearsed this. Marcy looked up first, her lips already twisted in that smug half-smile she wears when she thinks she's being noble. Jenna didn't even look at me. She kept fiddling with the hem of her dress, cream-colored, too short. She never wore that around me. We talked. Marcy started, her voice honeyed and fake serious. It's about the wedding. I didn't sit, just stared. The dog whimpered once and walked out of the room. Smartest one there. It's Jenna's wish. Marcy continued, placing her hand theatrically over our daughters. She wants her biological father to walk her down the aisle. Still no eye contact from Jenna. Her thumbs moved in slow circles on her phone. She had the nerve to be texting during this. It's not personal, Marcy added, like that was supposed to make it sting less. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. One slow nod, like a metronome setting a new tempo for the rest of my life. But something deep and old and coiled, snapped. Not like glass breaking. More like piano wire under tension, slowly unwinding with a silent scream. Marcy kept talking, filling the air with explanations I wasn't asking for. She's reconnecting with Ronnie. You've always said you wanted what's best for her. And this is about her. Ronnie. The name hit like sour wine on an empty stomach. The man who ran the second he heard the word pregnant. The man whose biggest contribution to Jenna's life was a pair of bad knees and a DUI record that spanned 3 counties. And now, after 2 decades of missed birthdays and court-mandated child support checks that never cleared, he was suddenly dad. I'm sorry, Jenna said finally, barely above a whisper. Her voice wavered for half a second. Maybe guilt. Maybe not. I looked at her for the first time. She looked like her mother more every year. Beautiful. Sharp. Cold. You've always been more of a guardian, Marcy added, as if recasting me in some Lifetime original movie. More like a mentor. You know, I wanted to laugh. Really, I did. But my face didn't move. I just nodded again and took off my jacket. Hung it by the door. My hands were still covered in piano grease, and I rubbed them on my jeans, slow, methodical strokes like I was scrubbing the last 20 years off me. Nobody moved. Jenna went back to texting. Marcy started flipping through wedding spreadsheets like it was just another Tuesday. No one said thank you. No one asked if I was okay. I walked past them, into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of tap water. The kind of thing you do to pretend everything is normal. And then I stared at the empty sink for a long, long time. There's a moment, if you've ever truly been gutted by someone you love, where you feel the cold creep in behind your eyes. Not anger, not sadness, just cold. I felt it then, spreading slow and deliberate. They thought they won something. Thought I'd go quietly into the night, maybe leave a check and a polite seat in the back row. But they forgot what kind of man I was. I rebuild broken things for a living. And this time, I wouldn't fix it. I'd let it fall apart, on my terms. The attic creaked beneath my feet like it hadn't been walked on in years, which, frankly, it hadn't. I hadn't had a reason to come up here since we boxed up the last of the baby toys and the crib that Jenna didn't want to remember. But now, under the yellow dome light with dead flies clinging to the edges, I knew exactly what I was looking for. It was in the brown accordion file marked Tax Docs 2004 to 2008. No one in this house would touch that. Too boring. Too dusty. Perfect. Inside, nestled between W-2s and faded insurance statements, were the real documents. Notarized custody agreements, emails printed from an AOL inbox, a letter from the state of Connecticut confirming Ronnie's terminated parental rights, and, most importantly, a sealed envelope with Jenna's name on it. I never gave it to her. It was meant for when she turned 18. But she'd spent her birthday on a trip with her sorority friends, and by the time she got home, she already had Marcy's voice in her ear. You don't need to dig up the past. He loves you. That's what matters. So the envelope stayed sealed. Until tonight. I didn't open it. I just stared at it. Let the weight of it settle on my palm. Then, after a long minute, I laid it on the desk next to my laptop and booted it up. Old Dell, humming like a dying cat. But it worked. And it still had what I needed. Every scan, every PDF, every voicemail backup from a lifetime ago. It was all there. The voicemail Ronnie left after the court hearing, back when Jenna was 2. Screw it. Let him have her. I'm not doing diapers, man. The letter from his own lawyer warning him not to show up drunk to mediation. The photo of him passed out in the driver's seat of his truck, with the car seat still installed behind him. I dragged them all into a folder labeled Eventual Truth. Then I opened Gmail. Composed a new message. To ronnie.sims@yahoo.com. Subject line. For the man who's so eager to be a father again. Body. Ronnie. You've been invited to participate in a public performance. Before you take center stage, please review the attached files. Your audience includes over 150 guests, multiple cameras, and a daughter who believes you deserve this spotlight. I won't be attending, but I will be watching. Consider this your final rehearsal. Attached were 2 files. Legal_parental termination _2005.pdf. Audio_confession_comp.wave. And then I sat there with my finger hovering over the send button for a full minute. There was no heat behind my breath. No shake in my hands. Just calm. Controlled. Like tuning a concert grand under pressure. One slip, one wrong string of tension, and the whole room hears it. I clicked send. And in that moment, I wasn't Jenna's guardian. I was the man who raised her. And I had just lit the fuse on the performance they thought they'd scripted without me. The next morning, I made coffee. Black. No sugar. Just the way I'd taken it every morning since Marcy started adding stevia without asking. I opened my phone, not to call anyone, but out of habit, and saw it. Jenna's story. A bright filter, overexposed, with her and Ronnie in front of some worn-out diner near the state line. He had his arm around her, teeth bared in what looked more like a grimace than a smile. The caption dripped sugar and ignorance. So grateful to finally have my real dad back in my life. 2 hearts #blessed #family first. Real dad. That phrase hit harder than the first time Marcy said, "It's not personal." I watched it on loop, just once. Then I put my phone down, turned off the coffee pot mid-drip, and sat in silence. Because that post wasn't for me. It was a public announcement. They thought I was gone. They thought this chapter had been closed, boxed, and buried. They didn't know the author still had the pen. Marcy, on the other hand, was thriving. She had her little echo chamber of Facebook friends who loved nothing more than praising growth and letting go. She posted a photo of Jenna's engagement ring, again, with the caption, "Proud Mama Moment," and so grateful to Walter for being the bigger person and stepping aside with grace. Not every man can do that. #co-parenting win. Oh, the irony. There was no co-parenting. There was me, 20 years of stability, and Ronnie, the pop-in hero who showed up just in time to hijack the applause. Meanwhile, the man of the hour, Ronnie himself, was already cracking under the pressure. He showed up 45 minutes late to Jenna's dress fitting. Reeking. Not the kind of just had a beer scent either. It was bourbon. Sweat. Something metallic in his breath. His shirt had a mustard stain near the hem. When Jenna asked if he was okay, he clapped her on the back and said, "Sweetheart, your OL man just partied a little hard last night. Don't worry, I clean up real nice." Marcy laughed. Actually laughed. "He's just adjusting," she told Jenna later. "It's a big deal for him. Give him space." Right. Because nothing says ready for fatherhood like showing up sloshed to a bridal fitting. I heard it all from the seamstress, Kara. Her mother was one of my tuning clients. And let's just say the grapevine in small towns like ours doesn't take weekends off. She told me, quietly, that Jenna didn't seem happy. That her hands shook when Ronnie made a scene. That he kept calling her princess, like he was auditioning for the role he abandoned 2 decades ago. But Marcy? She was too busy gloating. Every brunch with her friends turned into an oral history of how things worked out for the best. "He's come so far," she told one woman over mimosas. And Walter, bless his heart, he didn't make it weird. Some men can't let go of control, you know? No, Marcy. Some men don't abandon what they built just because you rewrote the script. And Ronnie? He didn't even know what he was holding. He thought this was his comeback tour. What he didn't realize was that it was a dress rehearsal for his public collapse. And I already had front row seats reserved. The email arrived at exactly 3:12 p.m. Subject line, wedding guest update. I knew what it was before I even opened it. The kind of email you can smell through the screen. Cheap perfume, fake diplomacy, and just enough passive voice to make it feel official. Still, I clicked. Dear Walter, after careful consideration and in light of Jenna's wishes, we are limiting attendance to those directly involved in the ceremony and immediate support roles. We appreciate your understanding and discretion. Warm regards, Jenna and Marcy. No signatures, no contact info, just sterile silence, like I'd been scraped off the guest list by a bureaucratic scalpel. I read it twice, then 3 times. And on the 4th time, I noticed it, the last line in the email footer. Please do not reply to this address. Fitting. So this was it. After 2 decades of recitals, scraped knees, dentist appointments, sleepover pickups, and teaching her how to drive in the church parking lot, my ticket to the wedding had been revoked. Not even a phone call. Just an automated dismissal with a polite dagger in the ribs. I didn't respond. Just closed the browser, opened a fresh folder on my hard drive, and labeled it. Evidence, final act. That's when the voicemail came in. 6:47 p.m. Unlisted number. I don't answer those. But I listened. Ronnie's voice oozed through the speaker like the floor of a bar at closing time. Hey, Walter. He slurred the name like it offended him. Guess who's got a tux and a daughter to walk? You had your chance, old man. Now it's my turn. I'm the real father now. Huh. Don't forget to iron your socks for whatever pity party you're going to. Jenna's mine now. Enjoy your free weekend, champ. Click. I sat still, hand on the desk, staring at the blinking cursor in an empty Word document. Not rage. Not pain. Just clarity. Like a fog lifting to reveal the coastline. I opened my voice recorder app, saved the message to my drive, and backed it up twice. One to the cloud, one to a thumb drive in my safe. Then I opened another tab. Google, secluded rentals near the coast. Pet friendly, no cell reception preferred. I found a place in Rockport. A little cliffside cottage, just 2 hours north, overlooking the kind of shore that swallowed cell signal and secrets whole. Booked it for the weekend of the wedding. Friday to Sunday. Paid up front. Non-refundable. Then I grabbed a pen, wrote a note on the back of a utility bill, and taped it to the inside of the front door. Gone fishing. Don't wait up. I packed one duffel. Just the essentials, jeans, a sweater, a bottle of scotch, and a folder of everything Ronnie forgot the world still remembered. The moment I zipped that bag closed, I realized something important. I wasn't uninvited. I had chosen to leave the theater before the final act. Because when they raised the curtain, they wouldn't need me in the audience. They'd feel me in every spotlight. And the man they crowned? He was already drunk on stage. The wedding morning broke warm and golden, the kind of day people write poems about. Birds chirped like they were in on the celebration. The venue, some overgroomed garden estate outside Hartford, was decked in white hydrangeas, wrought iron chairs, and more crystal than a hotel lobby in Vegas. Everything screamed perfection, except the one thing that mattered. Ronnie was missing. At 9:13 a.m., he was supposed to arrive for pre-ceremony photos. By 10:02, the best man was pacing in linen slacks too tight for his thighs, texting furiously. The photographer made light jokes about fashionably late, but when the groom offered his own jacket to the bride's mother because she was visibly shaking, not from the cold, it became clear. Something was wrong. Jenna was in the bridal suite, surrounded by 3 bridesmaids, a makeup artist with too much contour powder, and a growing cloud of unease. I wasn't there, of course, but I knew. Word travels fast when people are nervous and reception is good. A florist assistant posted a TikTok outside the tent. Bride looks stunning, but there's major drama. Eyes father of the bride MIA? Hashtag wedding chaos. It had already hit 4,000 views by the time Ronnie's absence became the unspoken headline. At 10:38, Marcy started making excuses. He probably just lost track of time. He always turns his phone off when he drives. He's being safe. He mentioned something about picking up cufflinks. Cufflinks. That's what she went with. The maid of honor whispered to the planner that Ronnie was supposed to bring the rings. That nugget rippled outward like blood in water. Staff exchanged looks. Jenna's hands began to tremble, not with rage, not yet, but with something worse, doubt. She stared at her reflection as the artist reapplied blush for the third time. Her eyes were red from holding back tears. She laughed too hard when someone mentioned how calm she looked. Her voice cracked when she asked if anyone had heard from Ronnie. The best man finally called me. Me. Not because he thought I'd help, but because he needed to say it out loud to someone who wouldn't lie to him. Ronnie's phone goes straight to voicemail. We've tried 8 times. He was supposed to pick up the boutonnieres. The guy never misses free food. Do you know where he might be? I said I didn't. I did. I also knew he wouldn't be walking anyone down the aisle today. Not in the way they pictured. Jenna kept up appearances. She smiled through the nerves, joked about how Dad's probably tying the perfect tie knot, and lost track of time. The bridesmaids laughed, half-hearted. Marcy hovered, phone clutched tight like it might ring if she glared hard enough. But under that tent, where every chair was perfectly aligned and every centerpiece was symmetrical to the inch, something began to tilt. Not physically, emotionally. The center of gravity shifted. Whispers began. Where's her dad? She looked so stressed. Wasn't Walter supposed to be here? One older guest muttered. It's disrespectful, honestly. After everything he did for her. The cracks were invisible, but spreading. And when something perfect starts to tremble, everyone starts watching. Everyone leans in. Especially when they sense that what's coming isn't a wedding. It's a reckoning. At 12:26 p.m., Ronnie stumbled into the venue like an extra from a canceled episode of Cops. He wore a rental tux that didn't match the groomsmen. Jacket too big, pants unhemmed, and a tie that looked like it had been tied by a blender. One side of his face was clean-shaven, the other had 2-day stubble. His eyes, bloodshot and sunken, blinked against the daylight like it offended him. He reeked. The best man caught the first whiff when he offered a handshake. Bourbon. Cigarettes. Something musky that might have been sweat or the inside of a casino. Ronnie smacked his back like they were frat brothers, then belched halfway through asking, "Where's my baby girl?" The bridesmaids froze. Jenna, standing just behind the linen curtain in her dress, white satin, modest, elegant, caught a glimpse of him and instinctively stepped back. She didn't speak, didn't breathe. Her mascara was already on. No one wanted to be the one to say anything. Marcy, in a pale blue mother-of-the-bride gown that probably cost more than my first car, hissed toward the officiant. Just keep going. He's here. That's all that matters. The officiant, to his credit, didn't flinch, but his eyes said a lot. The music started anyway, not the processional they'd rehearsed. The DJ hit play too early, panicked by the sudden timeline shift. Pachelbel's cannon kicked in mid-loop, and Jenna took her first step forward with her arm linked, reluctantly, with Ronnie's. He leaned in to whisper something. She flinched. She smiled through it, brittle and plastic. The kind of smile people wear when they realize the spotlight is not saving them. It's exposing them. Someone in the third row pulled out their phone. They didn't even try to hide it. A cousin, one of mine, ironically, leaned toward his wife and asked, not quietly, "Why didn't Walter walk her down the aisle?" No answer. Just uncomfortable glances, a cough, and a sudden interest in the flower arrangements. Ronnie wobbled slightly as they reached the altar. His bow tie was crooked, his eyes glassy. He nodded to the officiant like he'd just arrived at a bar he used to get kicked out of. Jenna's veil quivered with the breeze. Or maybe it was her. The audience, a sea of polite smiles and silent judgment, tried to pretend everything was fine. But you could feel it, the undercurrent of something wrong. The tension in the air wasn't joy. It was embarrassment dressed up in chiffon. Ronnie wiped his nose on his sleeve. The photographer hesitated. No one told her to stop, but the lens lowered half an inch, on instinct. Marcy kept smiling. Wide. Rigid. The way someone smiles when the camera's rolling but the building's on fire behind them. Then the whispers started. He doesn't look well. Is he drunk? Why didn't Jenna's dad, her real dad, walk her? A woman in the back whispered too loud. Wasn't Walter the one who raised her? Someone else replied. That guy looks like he just rolled out of a motel room. They weren't wrong. The ceremony hadn't even begun, and already, something was unraveling. The wrong man stood at the altar. The right man? He wasn't there. He didn't have to be, because they had invited this chaos. And I had only opened the door. At exactly 2:17 p.m., Just as Jenna took Ronnie's arm and the officiant lifted his hand to begin the vows, the sound of crisp footsteps on gravel broke through the delicate strains of violin music. Not rushed, not frantic, just deliberate, focused. A man in a dark gray suit, clean-shaven and sharp-eyed, entered from the side aisle, not through the main entrance, not through the bridle path. He cut through the grass like he owned the lawn, one hand at his side, the other holding a thick manila envelope, sealed and stamped. The violinist faltered. The music hiccuped, then stopped. Whispers sprouted like weeds. The man didn't look at the crowd. He walked straight to the officiant, stepped between Jenna and Ronnie without hesitation, and said with formal clarity, "This ceremony is to be paused, effective immediately." The officiant blinked. "Excuse me." The man raised the envelope. "By court order, this wedding must pause pending identity verification and parental rights confirmation." Gasps rippled outward, sharp and rising. Not a single person remained seated in silence. Jenna's hand flew to her mouth. Ronnie muttered, "What the hell is this?" and immediately reached for the envelope like he had the authority to take it. The messenger pulled it back without flinching. "This is a formal directive," the man continued, now addressing the guests. "Due to recent legal findings, including new evidence regarding paternity rights and custodial fraud, the ceremony cannot legally proceed until the parties involved are properly vetted." It was like someone had dropped a grenade into a garden party. Aunt Carol dropped her champagne glass. It didn't shatter, it just thunked against the grass, anticlimactic and perfect. Marcy stood. "Who sent you?" she demanded, stepping forward in a tone that was half mother of the bride, half wild animal cornered on a sinking ship. The man didn't answer her. He turned again to the officiant. "You are not to proceed. If you do, you will be in direct violation of a judicial mandate." Ronnie squinted. "This is bulls." "Sir," the messenger interrupted, firm. "Do not speak unless directly addressed." That silenced him faster than sobriety ever could. Jenna was shaking now. Hands clutched at the bodice of her gown, eyes darting between her mother, the stranger, and the crowd, some of whom had their phones out, filming. One of the groomsmen, obviously clueless, muttered to the groom beside him, "Is this part of the ceremony?" The officiant took the envelope. His hands trembled as he peeled back the flap. Inside, a series of court documents, notarized affidavits, and a cover letter from a law firm with a reputation for thoroughness and cold precision. A single flash drive was clipped to the back. He looked up at Jenna. This needs to stop for now." Marcy's voice broke. "No, this is ridiculous. He's her father. He's right here." The messenger simply said, "He is not." And that was when Jenna began to cry. Quiet at first, then louder. Not the elegant tear of a bride overwhelmed with joy. This was the sob of someone whose entire foundation just cracked beneath her heels. Guests stood. Some started gathering their things, unsure if they should stay or go. Others looked around, trying to make sense of what had just detonated before their eyes. From a chair in the back row, someone whispered, "Did Walter do this?" No one answered. "But I could have told them. That email? I sent it 2 nights ago with one instruction. Deliver at 2:17 p.m. No earlier. No later. Because that's when she would have said the words. That's when she would have called him Dad. That's when the lie would have become public. And that's exactly when the curtain was meant to fall." The officiant took one look at the top page in the envelope and stepped back like it had burned him. He handed it to the venue coordinator with trembling fingers, and she, poor woman, stood there blinking at the bold heading. Notice of terminated parental rights, Connecticut Family Court. Case #04-1863-P. Underneath that were 5 pages of legal documentation, each bearing the same signature line. Or, more precisely, the same blank signature line. Ronnie Sims had never filed to reinstate his parental rights. Not after abandoning Marcy during her 2nd trimester. Not after skipping 2 hearings and defaulting on child support until the state garnished a tax refund and he vanished across state lines. The only time he'd shown up in a courtroom was to plead no contest to disorderly conduct and accidental public intoxication in the courthouse parking lot. The envelope contained copies of every court record, certified and timestamped. But that was just the appetizer. The second item, a notarized affidavit, signed in 2011 by Ronnie himself. Scrawled with a cheap ballpoint pen, stained at one corner, but legally binding. It read, Ronald E. Sims voluntarily waive any claims to paternity or custody of Jenna M. Sims, born April 13, 2001. I acknowledge that Walter J. Harlan has provided full guardianship, support, and parental responsibilities since birth. I consider myself unfit and uninvolved. I do not seek contact. Stamped. Sealed. Witnessed by a notary who'd since retired. Marcy's jaw locked when she saw it. She lunged forward to snatch the pages, but the court officer intercepted her like a linebacker, calm and unimpressed. Then came the flash drive. A modest little piece of plastic, black, 8 gigabytes, labeled with a single word in Walter's handwriting, proof. The planner plugged it into a laptop meant for the DJ's set list. What played through the speakers wasn't romantic ballads or soft strings. It was Ronnie's voice, clear, slurred, unmistakably him. Look, man, I ain't gotta do jack. I show up, shake a few hands, drink the top shelf stuff, take the spotlight. Bride wants a real father moment, or whatever, I can fake it. Then I'm out. Maybe Marcy slips me a few bills for the effort. Easy money. No diapers. No speeches. Just free drinks and a tux. Laughter in the background. One guy goes, "Damn, you're really walking her down the aisle?" And Ronnie answers, "Hell yeah. Walter's out. They told me to clean up and show up. So I did. Now I'm the man again. Like a celebrity cameo. Only nobody gets paid but me." The sound that followed wasn't laughter. It was vacuum silence. Jenna crumpled onto the nearest chair. Mascara streaked, bouquet discarded, mouth agape. She stared at the floor like it had turned into glass, and she could see straight through to the lie below. Marcy's face turned ash. Pale. Bloodless. She opened her mouth, but there were no words. Just air. Ronnie didn't even argue. He stood there, red-eyed and sweating, lips parted in stunned disbelief as his own words hung in the air like smoke after a firework misfire. Guests got up. Some left. Others filmed. Someone whispered, "Is that legal?" The officer responded flatly, "Admissible. Certified. Prepared by counsel. Delivered by court authority." And then, like a final exhale, came the last line of the audio, Ronnie again, chuckling. "Only a sucker raises someone else's kid." It echoed. And in that moment, nobody was looking at me. But they all saw what I'd left behind. Not a man ruined. A man revealed. A con exposed by nothing but his own voice. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show up. I didn't need to. Because when you let the truth speak, it doesn't whisper. It detonates. While Ronnie stood dumbstruck and sweating beneath the gazebo arch, his jaw slack, his eyes twitching as if reality might somehow reset if he blinked enough, a second figure emerged from the side path, stepping over a fallen floral arrangement with calm, measured steps. Dark suit. Leather briefcase. Salt and pepper hair. He looked like the kind of man who never used contractions and always read the footnotes. My lawyer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm David Leavinger, legal counsel for Mr. Walter J. Harlan. A subtle pause. Appointed guardian of Jenna Marie Sims since 2001. Recognized in state court as primary custodial parent, sole provider, and the only individual with legal parental standing. Murmurs turned into a full-on wave. Phones were out again. A few guests actually stood up, not to leave, but because they couldn't believe what they were watching. One woman gasped like it was a telenovela cliffhanger. David unlatched his case and pulled out one sheet. Just one. "This," he said, holding it like a verdict, "is a reaffirmation of guardianship, signed and stamped by Connecticut Family Court. It legally designates Mr. Harlan as the sole father of record, with full financial, medical, and legal rights. All documentation of Mr. Sims' terminated rights are attached. There is no reinstatement on file. Therefore," he turned, now addressing the officiant directly, "the man who escorted Miss Sims to this altar does so as a guest, not as a parent, not as a father." Ronnie tried to open his mouth, but David shut it with one final phrase. And under current statutes, misrepresentation of familial relationship in a legal ceremony can constitute fraud, civil, and possibly criminal, depending on the context of any compensation involved. You could hear a pin drop. Then David said it. "In the eyes of the law, Jenna Marie Sims has one father. He raised her. He paid for her education. He nursed her through chicken pox, heartbreak, and her first car accident. He paid for this wedding. He protected her. And his name is Walter Harlan. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. Because when David said my name, Jenna's knees buckled. One of the bridesmaids caught her elbow before she went down, but it was too late. The illusion collapsed like paper in the rain. Walter Harlan, the man who gave up concerts to work weekends, the man who taught her how to drive a stick, the man who let her cry for hours when her first boyfriend ghosted her, the man who kept every one of her report cards in a drawer she never looked in. Her father. Marcy stumbled forward, lips trembling, mascara ruined. Wait, this isn't how this was supposed to. David didn't even turn to face her. It's exactly how it was supposed to go. You just thought no one would say it out loud. She opened her mouth again, probably to argue, probably to spin. But the weight of the silence swallowed her. No one rushed to her defense. Not Jenna. Not Ronnie. Not the guests. Not even the wedding planner, who stood frozen mid-step, clutching her headset like it might catch fire. The illusion was gone. And what was left in its place was truth. And truth has gravity. You don't argue with it. You fall to it. The sea was gray that morning, almost metallic, like the whole horizon had been forged out of dull steel. Waves rolled in methodically, without urgency or fury, just a quiet, endless rhythm that didn't care what burned, collapsed, or crumbled miles away. I sat on a weather-beaten bench near the dunes, hands wrapped around a paper cup of black coffee gone cold 2 hours ago. A gull cried overhead. I didn't look up. My phone had buzzed 17 times. 18. It was sitting face down on the bench beside me, screen lighting up with each desperate attempt to pull me back into the world I'd walked away from. I didn't need to look at the names. I knew them. Jenna, Marcy, the best man, a local reporter. One call, I'm sure, from Ronnie himself, drunk, furious, and suddenly aware of just how permanent a signature on court documents really is. I let them all go unanswered. Let them pile up like driftwood. The wedding didn't finish. That much was certain. The guests had fled before the reception ever began, and the venue refused to issue a refund because technically, they had provided the location as agreed. The officiant left without packing up. The DJ packed his gear in silence, skipping the father-daughter playlist entirely. It made headlines. I'd been told that. Bride's real father exposed mid-ceremony, wedding halted by court order. A few grainy cell phone videos made it onto local news, even a national gossip blog. Jenna's friends disabled comments. Marcy's social media went dark. But I didn't see it firsthand. I wasn't watching. I was here, on the coast of Maine. Rockport. Small, quiet, windy. The kind of place where nobody asks why an older man rents a cliffside cottage and sits for hours without speaking. I hadn't packed much. Didn't need to. Because I wasn't escaping. I was closing a door. There was no speech. No confrontation. No slammed fists or raised voices. Just the truth, delivered calmly, surgically, and right on time. The world saw what they were. And what I was. Not a backup. Not a mentor. Not a placeholder. Her father. The man who stayed. The man who paid. The man who, when they tried to rewrite the script, refused to play the fool. They chose spectacle. I chose silence. They got headlines. I got closure. The phone buzzed again. 19. I sipped my cold coffee and let the tide roll in. Patient, steady, unconcerned. I didn't need a thank you. I didn't need forgiveness. And I sure as hell didn't need to explain myself to the people who underestimated what I'd built quietly for 20 years. This was justice. Not loud. Not cinematic. Just final. The truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And it wrecks everything. The photo hit like a shovel to the face. His daughter, his little girl, was standing in front of the fireplace he'd built with his bare hands. That old New England mantle he'd driven 2 states to find. The stockings were hung, garland wrapped around the railing just like he used to do every year without fail, and in the background, her new stepfather, Rick, the weekend kayak dad, was carving a turkey at Dan's old kitchen island. Dan stared at it on his laptop screen, mouth dry, fingers frozen above the keyboard. There was no caption, just a red heart emoji. 37 likes from cousins, aunts, and even his own niece. People he'd helped move into their homes. People who used to come to his house for Christmas Eve chili and midnight poker while the women gossiped and wrapped gifts upstairs. He scrolled. More photos. Matching pajamas. Wine glasses. Candles. Caroling. Not one trace of him. Not one memory acknowledged. He wasn't even a footnote. Then came the message. It was from Paul, his ex-wife's brother. The same man who'd cried on Dan's shoulder during his second divorce. Let's keep it simple this year. The text read, with a smiley face. No drama. Just family. Followed by a thumbs-up emoji, like Dan should be grateful not to ruin their matching sweater aesthetic. He almost ignored it. Almost closed the laptop and went back to his quiet kitchen, where two steaks sat uncooked beside a bottle of wine he wasn't sure he even wanted anymore. But something in him said, scroll back. Something primal. And there it was, sent a day earlier by his niece. Bless her blunt Gen Z heart. A screenshot from the family group chat. Should we invite Dan? 7 names. 6 no votes. Only one person, his niece, had voted yes. And beneath it, someone had written, he's not blood. Let's move on. He stared at the sentence like it was written in fire. Not blood. As if raising a child didn't count. As if years of family trips, hospital visits, tuition payments, and showing up, always showing up, meant nothing. He was the one who sat beside her father through chemo, who held her sister's hand through that miscarriage, who paid for Paul's rehab in 2006 without telling a soul. And now? Now he was just erased. Like a guest who stayed too long. Outside, the first snow had started to fall. Heavy, thick flakes blanketed the street. The kind of snow that made everything quiet, made the world look softer than it was. He walked to the window and stared out at the glow of distant Christmas lights. Across the street, the neighbors were setting up their inflatable Santa. The sound of children laughing drifted faintly through the glass. Dan didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just stood there, motionless, letting the cold from the window seep into his skin. Something calcified inside him in that moment. A slow hardening, like watching wet cement turn to stone. He had given them everything. And now they were throwing a party in his old house, by his fireplace, with his traditions, and had the audacity to pretend he never existed. He turned away from the window, walked to the hallway closet, reached up into the back shelf, behind the camping gear and the old beach towels, pulled down a small white box he hadn't touched in months. It was still sealed. Inside, a DNA test kit. He'd ordered it during a moment of weakness, back when something in his gut had whispered that his ex-wife's timeline didn't quite add up. He never used it. Felt ashamed just thinking it. But now it didn't feel like paranoia. It felt like clarity. Dan set the box on the kitchen table, uncapped the pen beside it. He no longer wanted their invitation. He wanted the truth. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish and something older, cardboard. Maybe. Or memory. Dan sat cross-legged on the floor, the same way he used to with his daughter when she was 6 and obsessed with puzzles. Only now, the puzzle was his life, and the pieces were brittle photos and birthdays no one remembered. He opened the first album. Leather-bound, dusty, the spine cracked like old knuckles. On the first page, his daughter at 4, missing a front tooth, frosting on her nose, grinning with the kind of reckless joy only children can summon. Dan was behind her, arms raised with the cake, a goofy hat on his head. His ex had captioned it in glittery pen, Daddy's Girl. He turned the pages slowly. Her ballet recital. Their trip to Colorado. The time he pulled an all-nighter helping her build a volcano for science class because she forgot about it until Sunday evening. And then a 3rd grade. The ER visit after she fell off her bike. He remembered every second. The blood. The way she clutched his shirt. How he'd yelled at the nurse to just get the damn stitches in, while her mother, as usual, was somewhere out of reach, blaming traffic. Then came middle school. He found a photo of the 3 of them at her graduation ceremony, standing on the lawn under a cheap rented archway, Dan's arm around her shoulder, his ex in sunglasses. And in the background, blurred but unmistakable, Rick, standing just a little too close, smiling just a little too long. Dan narrowed his eyes. That had been the summer she and her mother took a break. 2 months apart, she said. Time to breathe. When she came back, she was silent, cold, and pregnant. Dan had welcomed her back without a word. Thought he was being a good man, a forgiving man. He flipped the page. And then it came back, that moment. Some backyard barbecue, maybe 2005. His wife's friend, Carol, had leaned over after a few glasses of wine and laughed. "You know, she doesn't even look like you, Dan. She's way too pretty." Everyone had chuckled. Dan too. Back then, it was just a throwaway line. A joke. But now? Now it echoed like a warning he hadn't understood until it was too late. He set the album aside and stood. Walked slowly to his desk drawer. Opened it. Inside, untouched, still in its original packaging, the DNA kit. The seal unbroken. The barcode sticker still crisp. He picked it up. The weight felt heavier than it should have. Like it knew what it contained. Like it had waited for him. Dan carried it to the bathroom. Opened the instructions. He read every word this time. No hesitation. He took the swab, steady hands. Rotated it inside his cheek. Sealed the vial. Labeled it. Back in the kitchen, he logged in, registered the kit, selected the test type. Not just paternity lineage. Historical. Full trace. He printed the shipping label. Slipped the kit into the prepaid envelope. He paused before sealing it. Because once this envelope left his hands, he wouldn't be able to unknow. There was no going back. No comforting lies. Just what was, and what always had been. He sealed it anyway. Walked it to the mailbox. Let it fall. The click of the metal door felt final. Like the first nail in a coffin. Dan stood in the snow, hands in pockets, breath fogging in the winter air. The world was quiet. For the first time in months, his mind wasn't. He wasn't imagining things. He wasn't paranoid. He was finally paying attention. Dan had always thought of himself as meticulous, but never suspicious. He was the kind of man who color-coded toolboxes, not people. But by the third time he caught a discrepancy in a pediatrician record from 2001, he knew this wasn't about being organized anymore. It was about digging through mud to find the skeleton someone buried under a fake family portrait. It started with an innocent phone call. "Hi, I'm just trying to request historical medical records for my daughter, Ava Hanley." "Yes, full authorization." "Yes, I'm her legal father." He expected a short wait, maybe a fee. Instead, he got a voicemail 2 days later from a confused receptionist. "Mr. Hanley, we actually don't have your name listed on her pediatric file until 2002. I'm not sure why, since she was born in 2000. But you might want to speak with our administrator." He hung up the phone slowly. 2002? She'd been born in December 2000. He remembered holding her in the hospital, her tiny hand wrapped around his pinky. He remembered signing forms. Filling in Father Daniel Hanley. Holding his wife's hand. Kissing her forehead. And yet, 2 years missing? He opened his filing cabinet. His hands weren't shaking, but his breathing was off, short, shallow. He pulled out the tax folder for 2000. Then 2001. His insurance documents. Emergency contacts. There it was, a Blue Shield enrollment form. Listed dependent, Ava Marie Hanley. Enrollment date? April 2002. Why the delay? He knew he hadn't waited almost 2 years to put his daughter on the plan. Hadn't forgotten. He found the copy of her birth certificate. Mother, Elaine Marie Hanley. Father, dash, not even blank. Just a line. Like a placeholder for someone who never showed up. Dan sat down hard. The questions that had once whispered were now full-throated. How had he never noticed? Why had no one told him? What the hell was he doing at the hospital that night? If not signing in as her father. He began combing through old email archives. Most were gone, but he found a backup on a thumb drive. Opened it. Searched hospital. Nothing. Ava. Nothing relevant. Pregnancy. There, one message, dated April 2000. Elaine had written, "We need a break, Dan. I'm sorry. I don't know what I want right now. I just need space." He remembered the fight that followed. The slammed door. The 3-week stretch where they didn't talk. The trip she took to clear her head. To her sister's place, she said. He remembered the guilt he felt. How he welcomed her back with dinner, flowers, forgiveness. How he didn't even ask questions when she said she was pregnant. He'd just assumed. Of course he did. He'd wanted a family so badly. He didn't stop to verify it was his. Now, sitting there 22 years later, he felt like the dumbest man alive. But not for long. Because now Dan had purpose. He wasn't some pathetic ex-husband sulking in the snow while his family toasted without him. No, he was a man assembling evidence. Building a timeline. Constructing a story with sharper teeth than any Christmas toast. He requested full insurance claim histories, started a spreadsheet, cross-referenced pediatric visits, OB/GYN appointments, even dental work. Little cracks formed everywhere. Receipts billed to an address in Portland, the one Elaine swore she never went back to after college. A blood test Ava took at 12 with an unknown family allergy flag. Genetic markers that never raised red flags because Dan's family didn't carry them, but someone's did. Piece by piece, the truth stopped hiding. He even called his old family doctor. The receptionist was new, but polite. Dr. Givens? Oh no, he retired years ago. But we still have his archived notes. Do you want us to send the parental consent forms from your daughter's early visits? Yes, Dan said, too calmly. They arrived 2 days later. Signed by Elaine. Alone. No co-parent name. No secondary contact. No father listed. Dan placed the forms on the table beside the DNA kit receipt. He added the tax forms, the birth certificate, the email printout. Then he pulled out a new sheet of paper. He wrote one sentence in bold ink across the top. December 2000, present, the lie. And underneath that, a checklist. One by one, he started listing names. People who had lied. People who had smiled while lying. People who had voted him out. This wasn't a man unraveling. This was a man organizing an execution with wrapping paper. The text came in at 11:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, 2 weeks before Christmas. Ava, hey Dad. Just wanted to say, I think we're going to keep things small this year. Just Mom, Rick, the kids. It's easier that way. No explanation. No apology. Just that familiar, slippery word. Easier. Like he was a piece of furniture they didn't know where to put. Like excluding him was an act of mercy, not betrayal. Dan read it in silence. The text bubbles faded. She didn't wait for a response. He typed, totally understand. I'll be sending some gifts. Merry Christmas in advance, sweetheart. Love you always. He ended it with a heart emoji. He didn't mean it, but it looked fatherly, appropriate, non-threatening. Then he put his phone down and looked at the wooden box on his kitchen table. It had once held cigars, a gift from a former client, something Dan had never used but always kept. Dark walnut, brass hinges, smooth sliding top. Now it was lined with red felt, like a magician's trick box. Only there would be no applause at the end of this reveal. Inside were 8 envelopes, each labeled in his neat, engineer's handwriting. AVA, Elaine, Rick, Paul, Carol, Frank, Margaret, Harold. Each name had a number written in pencil in the bottom right corner. Not page numbers, blast radius. He placed a letter on top, folded in thirds, addressed simply to the family. No accusations. No screaming. Just a surgical dissection of timelines, receipts, medical facts, and the DNA results, soon to be delivered electronically to each individual listed once the box was opened. The QR codes were printed on cardstock. One scan, and they'd see what Dan had seen. He slid the top of the box closed. The brass lock clicked shut with a satisfying finality. On the lid, he attached a cream label in black ink. Please open together. That was the key, together. They'd laugh. Think it was one of his weird sentimental things. Maybe a joke. Maybe a gift. Maybe some nostalgic family photos to make them feel better about voting him off the damn island. Dan didn't care what they thought it was, because he knew what it really was. He called the courier himself. No online forms this time. He wanted voice confirmation, names, timestamps. The man on the line promised delivery by 4 p.m. Christmas Day, just before dinner. Highest priority tier, the courier assured. Dan smiled faintly. Good, he said. It's the only gift they're getting from me. After the call, Dan went to his closet and pulled down a worn box marked Christmas decorations. Inside, he found the carved wooden angel Ava had made in the 3rd grade, back when her hands were still sticky with glue and trust. He held it for a long moment. Then, gently, he placed it into the wooden box. Taped to the underside of the angel's wings was a slip of paper. One name. Just one. The man the DNA matched. Dan didn't write anything else. No gloating. No signature. Just a name. He closed the box again and wrapped it in matte green paper, tied with a simple twine bow. No flashy foil. No ribbon curls. Just enough effort to suggest sincerity, not spectacle. He included a small card taped on top. Family is about truth. Please open together. With love, Dan. He dropped it off at the courier depot himself, the snow crunching underfoot as he walked to the loading bay. The worker scanned the label, nodded, and slid it onto a cart bound for Christmas Eve deliveries. Dan turned, shoved his gloved hands into his coat pockets, and walked back to his car without looking back. He didn't speed. He didn't hum a Christmas song. He didn't smile. He just stared at the road, a quiet storm building behind his eyes. They thought he was done. What they didn't realize, he hadn't even started. The house on Wyndham Lane was glowing like something off a Hallmark card. Snow on the eaves, candlelight flickering in the windows, Bing Crosby crooning low in the background. The fireplace crackled. Plates clinked. The scent of roasted ham and clove oranges hung in the air thick enough to chew. Laughter echoed through the dining room as glasses clinked, and someone, not surprisingly, Paul, made a crass joke about Rick finally learning how to carve meat like a real man. Elaine laughed too loud. Rick beamed. Ava smiled thinly, checking her phone under the table. And then came the knock. 3 soft raps, followed by the ring of a doorbell. Not urgent, but firm. Elaine wiped her hands on a linen napkin and opened the door. A courier stood there in a black windbreaker, holding a flat parcel wrapped in green paper and twine. Delivery for the Hanley household, he said. Elaine blinked. Who's it from? The man glanced at the label. Mr. Hanley. For a moment, her face twitched. Dan, she said under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. Behind her, Frank piped up from the kitchen, Santa's got a restraining order now? Chuckles rolled through the room. Elaine turned, box in hand. It's from Dan, she said, flatly. Oh boy, Rick muttered, already 3 glasses of wine deep. They gathered around the table as Elaine set the box down. The twine bow came off easily. Someone said, let's just open it together and get it over with. There were murmurs of agreement, the same tone people use when they unwrap socks. Elaine lifted the lid. Silence. Inside, 8 envelopes. Neatly stacked, clearly labeled. Her name. Ava's. Rick's. Paul's. The rest of the table. Each one cut clean with an X-Acto knife. The handwriting unmistakably Dan's, precise, stiff, emotionally distant. Resting on top of the pile, 1 folded letter. Thicker than a greeting card. Weighty. The outside read. To the people I loved. Ava reached for it. Wait, Rick said, half laughing. What if it's a poem? The guy always did love his dramatic moments. Or a suicide note, Frank added, then immediately looked at Carol. What? I'm joking. Elaine slowly opened the letter. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with that quiet dread you get when you realize something isn't a prank after all. She began to read. The opening was soft, measured. No emotion, no accusations. Dan's voice on paper. I hope this finds you surrounded by light, by warmth, by all the things we once shared in happier times. I'm not writing out of bitterness. I'm writing because silence has weight, and I've carried yours for too long. The room stilled. Elaine's mouth opened, then closed. She continued reading. Each envelope contains something you deserve. Not a gift, not a punishment, just the truth. Some of you will recognize it immediately. Others won't. But I ask that you open them together. Because family, if it means anything, should face things together. No one spoke. Even Paul, halfway through his gin and tonic, sat with his arms crossed tight across his chest. Ava picked up the envelope with her name. Held it. It was heavier than expected. So what is this? Rick asked, his voice suddenly tight. What the hell did he send? Elaine put down the letter and looked around the table. Her face had gone pale. No one laughed now. She didn't answer his question. She didn't need to. Because everyone in that room had felt the temperature drop. The envelopes weren't threats. They were mirrors. And Dan had just made damn sure they were all sitting down when they looked in. Harold Hanley had always carried himself like the patriarch of some royal bloodline that no one dared question. Even after his second stroke, even when the doctors told him to cut the scotch and drop the cigars, he still held court at every family gathering like he was Caesar on Christmas furlough. The chair at the head of the table had belonged to him since forever. No one dared sit in it, unless Harold gestured. That night was no different. He sat there in his stiff wool vest, hands folded, a bourbon neat in front of him, chin up, as if the box Dan had sent was merely a gnat in the room. Then Ava. without a word, slid the envelope marked Harold across the table to him. He chuckled. Well now, the old bastard wrote me a love letter. No one laughed. He tore the seal. Inside, 2 documents. The first was a printed lab result. Plain, clinical. A paternity test. Harold squinted. This ain't even for Dan, he muttered. It's for Matthew. Heads turned. A few exchanged glances. Elaine stiffened. Harold's youngest son, Matthew, was 26. A late-in-life miracle, as they used to call him. Born after what Harold used to brag was a weekend retreat with the missus. Everyone remembered the jokes. How Harold joked that the old gun still fired. Now his hand trembled. He read the line again. Then a third time. Ava leaned in, confused. What's it say? Harold didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out the second page, a letter from Dan. Short. Handwritten. Cold. You always said I owed you loyalty, Harold. You reminded me of it every time you needed something. When I drove you to your appointments. When I paid for Ava's dance lessons because your pension was tight. When you told me I wasn't really family. Just the guy who married in. But Matthew? He deserved real loyalty. Real paternity. Real truth. Turns out, I wasn't the only one raising someone else's child. Silence collapsed over the table like a thunderclap. Harold's face drained white. This is bullshit, he snapped. But his voice had a crack in it. A high-pitched note of disbelief. The kind that betrays you when your mind starts doubting its own history. Elaine was frozen, eyes wide. Paul's drink was halfway to his mouth. Carol had put her fork down. Rick, who never knew Matthew well, blinked in slow motion, clearly trying to piece together the implications like someone trying to read a puzzle without edges. I want a glass of water, Harold barked suddenly. Somebody get me a goddamn. But no one moved. Matthew wasn't there, of course. He was celebrating Christmas with his girlfriend's family in Arizona. But now he existed in that room like a ghost. Like a bomb that had already gone off and left shrapnel in the shape of Dan's handwriting. Ava spoke first. Wait, does this mean Dan had that test done on Matthew? When? How? Elaine's voice was low, almost imperceptible. He was there when Matthew had his wisdom teeth out. Last year, remember? She said it without thinking. And just like that, the timeline snapped into place. Dan had submitted DNA. Matthew's. Without anyone noticing. Quiet. Precise. Legal. Dan had always played the long game. And now it was everyone else trying to catch up. Paul finally spoke. Jesus. He's not even coming to dinner, and he's dropping truth grenades. Harold pushed back from the table, the legs of his chair screeching. His glass tipped and shattered on the floor. This doesn't mean anything. You think a piece of paper means I didn't raise him? That I didn't. But he didn't finish. Because he knew. And worse, he knew Dan knew. Dan knew exactly what he was doing by starting with Harold. Not just the oldest in the room. The loudest. He cracked the foundation. And the table, once united in smug dismissal, now leaned slightly in opposite directions, fractured. And there were 7 envelopes left. Ava stared at the envelope in front of her like it had started hissing. Her name written in block letters, underlined once. Neat, steady, unmistakable, her dad's handwriting. The one that used to label her school folders, her lunchbox notes, her Christmas tags. To Ava. Love, Dad. Only now, the ink looked heavier. More permanent. Rick reached for her hand. You don't have to open it, sweetheart. She didn't even hear him. She peeled it open slowly, trying not to breathe. Inside 2 pages. One was another lab result, like Harold's. The other was a letter. She read the first page quickly, then again. Her eyes scanned it faster each time, like her brain was trying to outrun the words. Her lips parted, then trembled. This says, her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. It says my biological father might be someone else. No one moved. Rick pulled his hand back like he'd been burned. Elaine made a choking sound, like a sob half swallowed by shock. Ava looked up. Mom. Elaine was already shaking her head. No, this is some sick joke he's playing. Dan's losing it. He's always had issues with boundaries. He's just bitter. But Ava held the paper up. It's not a joke. She turned to the table, voice rising. It says my DNA has markers that don't match Dan's paternal line. They cross-referenced his and mine. Twice. The probability of paternity is less than 2%. Elaine stood up so fast her chair tipped back. I told him not to dig. I told him, this isn't what Christmas is for. But it was too late. The air in the room had shifted. That soft candlelit glow was now cold and forensic. Every face around the table lit with confusion, discomfort, suspicion. Ava stared straight ahead, face pale. Why would he test me? Rick, ever the amateur mediator, tried to chime in. Maybe he was paranoid. I mean, it's Dan. You know how he is with control. Paul leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Or maybe he knew something the rest of us didn't. Elaine snapped. Shut up, Paul. This isn't your damn courtroom. But the damage was already spiderwebbing. Ava held the letter in her lap, unfolded. She read aloud. You were the light of my life, Ava. That's what made this truth so hard to face. I didn't seek it out. I stumbled into it. Medical forms. Discrepancies. A question I should have asked years ago. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because you deserve to know who you are. Not for my sake. For yours. Then another pause as she skimmed the closing lines. If I'm not your biological father, it doesn't erase our memories. I changed your diapers. Held your hand through school plays. Cheered at your graduation. I was your father by choice, every day. But you need to know the truth of your blood, because truth is the only thing that survives betrayal. Ava's voice cracked hard on the word betrayal. Elaine sat down again, like someone had punched her knees out from under her. Rick tried again, gentler. Honey, come on. This doesn't change anything. Ava turned slowly to him. You knew him for 6 years, Rick. I knew him my whole life. And you're saying this doesn't change anything? Rick held up both hands. I didn't mean it like. Elaine cut in. He's trying to turn you against me. He's bitter and manipulative, and he always hated the fact that I moved on. Ava didn't respond. She just folded the letter slowly, like it might break if she moved too fast. Her eyes never left her mother. You said I was conceived after you got back together. I did, Elaine said, too quickly. But you never let me do ancestry. You said it was creepy. You told me not to ask questions when people joked I didn't look like Dad. And you always changed the subject when I asked about that summer. Elaine's jaw locked. Across the table, Paul leaned back in his chair with a long exhale. Jesus Christ. And just like that, the room lost its center. Because now it wasn't just about Dan being hurt. It was about Ava being a stranger in her own story. And there were still 6 envelopes left. Elaine's envelope sat untouched on the table, like it was ticking. The red wine in her glass had gone still, untouched since Ava's voice cracked in half 2 minutes earlier. No one reached for food. The ham sat sweating in its own glaze. The candles flickered, but even they seemed hesitant to burn too brightly. Open it, Paul said finally, voice flat. Elaine didn't move. Open it, Ava repeated, eyes locked on her mother. Not pleading. Not begging. Commanding. Elaine's fingers reached for the envelope, then stopped. Her hand hovered, shaking slightly. I don't have to justify. You don't, Ava cut in. You just have to open the damn envelope. The words cracked across the table like a whip. Elaine tore it open. Inside was no test result, just a letter. Handwritten. Dan's voice again. But this time, colder. Older. Sharper than any scalpel. She read silently. Her face drained. Her lips parted. She tried to speak, but the words dissolved before they formed. Ava snatched the letter from her hands. Read it aloud. I believed you when you said it was just a break. I believed you when you came back, said you'd made a mistake, that you wanted a fresh start. We were young. I forgave you. I wanted to move forward. What I didn't know, what you never told me, was that you were already pregnant. Rick's glass slipped from his hand. Hit the floor. Shattered. The timeline doesn't lie. Ava was born in December 2000. You returned to me in April. You told me in June that we were expecting. You claimed she was a surprise. That we were lucky. But she wasn't a surprise. You already knew. You came back carrying someone else's child and let me believe she was mine. You married me. You let me name her. You let me sign that birth certificate, hold her, raise her. All while protecting your secret like it was a sacred thing. Elaine shot to her feet. That's not how it happened. Oh, really? Paul barked, venom in his voice now. Because the math doesn't lie. You came back from your retreat mysteriously 2 months pregnant and told Dan it was his. You gamed the man. Elaine turned to Ava, panicked. Sweetheart, I didn't know for sure. It was complicated. Dan and things were messy then. I was scared. I didn't want to destroy what we had. You didn't want to destroy yourself, Ava snapped. You let him carry your life for 22 years. And you let me believe it too. Elaine looked around the table, but all she saw were eyes retreating. Even Rick was staring down into his empty plate like it might offer him an exit. None of you understand what it was like, she shouted. You think I had a roadmap for all of this? I was alone. I was confused. Paul folded his arms. Inconveniently silent. Elaine's fist balled. Dan never asked E. He shouldn't have had to ask. Ava's voice tore the air. He raised me, loved me, protected me, and you let him do it while carrying someone else's child. Silence again. The kind that rattles. Elaine slumped back into her chair. Her eyes were wet now, but there was no sympathy in the room. Only fractures. Jagged ones. Even Frank, who'd been silent through most of it, whispered, Jesus, Elaine, how long were you going to carry that lie? Until the grave. Ava wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked smaller now. Not like a child, just someone whose foundation had been stripped out from under her in one swing. And the worst part, she said, staring at the table. If Dan hadn't been erased from this family, we'd all still be living in that lie. Smiling, toasting, taking pictures. She looked up. Her eyes locked on her mother's. You didn't just betray him, Mom. You betrayed me. Elaine opened her mouth. No sound came out. Because everything she'd built, defended, and repeated for decades had just been disassembled by 2 sheets of paper and 20 years of wrong. And there were 5 envelopes left. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing red coals. No one noticed. The only sound now was the dull hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. Forks sat untouched on plates gone cold. A gravy boat had crusted at the edge. No one moved to clean it. Carol had taken her envelope and quietly left the room. Paul sat unopened in front of him like a bomb with a faulty timer. Even Rick, usually full of noise and smug little quips, had stopped talking altogether. He hadn't looked at Elaine once since she sat down. And in the center of the table, beneath a spilled wine stain, lay the final page of Dan's letter. Ava picked it up. Her fingers were steadier now. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Everyone was listening. To each of you. Thank you for teaching me what silence costs. A pause. Even the candles seemed to flicker differently now. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I wanted to understand. But you didn't offer clarity. You offered exile. You didn't ask if I was okay. You voted. You voted me out of a family I helped build, finance, protect, and hold together. You used silence as punishment. So I used silence to prepare. Elaine's jaw clenched. Her eyes brimmed again. But the tears no longer moved anyone. They dried up, like sympathy. Harold, you told me loyalty defines a man. So I gave you mine. Paid your bills, drove you to chemo, never once threw your failures in your face. Turns out, loyalty is a one-way street for you. And for Matthew, he deserves a father who knows the truth, even if it comes too late. Harold's eyes didn't move. He looked like stone. Elaine, you told me I was safe. That we were back on track. You laid beside me every night while hiding a truth that shaped our entire life. You don't owe me an apology, but Ava deserved a mother who could tell the truth before it exploded out of a sealed envelope. And she didn't get one. Elaine sobbed softly now, but still no one touched her. Not even Ava. Rick, well, no note for Rick. He just filled a vacancy I should have never left open. Someone exhaled sharply. Paul muttered Jesus under his breath. To the rest of you, those who voted, I'm not angry. I'm not broken. I'm not bitter. I'm clear. For the first time in years, I spent so long keeping the peace that I lost sight of how dishonest peace can be. Dan's voice, Ava realized, had changed. This wasn't the voice of a man kicked to the curb. This was the voice of a man standing on the curb, calmly lighting the match. So this year, I gave you something different. I gave you truth. Not vengeance. Not bitterness. Not drama. Just facts. DNA. Paper. Timelines. Something you can't vote on. Something you can't erase. She took a breath. Read the last line. Merry Christmas. I'll be seeing none of you again. Ava folded the page. No one spoke. Elaine's shoulders shook, silent and small. Rick was staring at the melted wax as if it could rewind time. Paul pushed his envelope slightly away with one finger, like it might lunge at him. And in the kitchen, somewhere behind the half-closed door, a faint mechanical whir. The old house's heater kicked on. It was the only thing that moved, because the real heat had left with Dan and taken the air with it. They hadn't unwrapped a gift. They'd unwrapped judgment. Deliberate, layered, inevitable. And as the silence thickened like smoke around that long table, one thing settled in everyone's chest. An unspoken certainty that nothing, not even the presents waiting under the tree, would be opened with joy again. There were still unopened envelopes. But it didn't matter. The last page had said everything. Elaine was the first to break. She stood up, slow and uneven, clutching the back of her chair like it might steady a world that had just flipped upside down. Her mouth opened, half-formed apologies, defensive reflexes, maybe even an instinct to mother, but nothing came out. Her eyes were red, leaking, but no one moved to comfort her. Not Ava, not Rick, not even her own brother. She walked out of the dining room without another word, her footsteps oddly loud on the hardwood floor. Upstairs, a door slammed. Then silence. Harold followed next. He didn't speak, didn't look at anyone, just stood, gathered what was left of his pride in a scarf that wasn't even his, and muttered something about this whole circus. His cane tapped angrily down the hallway. No coat, no hat, just stormed into the cold like the air owed him an apology too. Carol said nothing, just grabbed her purse and walked straight out the front door without looking back. Her unfinished wine still on the table. Paul picked up his envelope, stared at it for a long second, then stuffed it in his coat without opening it. He looked at Rick. Rick didn't look back. Paul shrugged. You married the lie. Enjoy the aftertaste. And left. Now it was just Ava and Rick. She hadn't moved since reading the last page. Her hands rested in her lap. Her eyes, dry now, were fixed on the tree, on the blinking lights. The ones Dan had untangled for her every year, without fail. The year she was 9, she cried because one bulb wouldn't blink. Dan drove to 3 stores to find a match. She didn't remember the gift that year, only that. And now, the tree blinked, but nothing else worked. Rick finally broke the silence. Look, he blindsided us. That wasn't fair. Ava didn't look at him. No, he gave us the truth. We just weren't ready for it. Rick cleared his throat. So what now? I think, she said quietly, you should leave. He blinked. Me? She turned her head. Finally met his eyes. You told me he was overreacting. That he was making drama. You laughed with them. You said it was easier. Her voice didn't rise. That made it worse. Well, now it's easier. He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded once. Got up, left. Ava sat alone for a long time. Somewhere upstairs, her mother sobbed. Somewhere in town, her grandfather wandered through a snowstorm with a last name that now carried a question mark. She reached forward, took one ornament off the tree, a small wooden angel. Dan's handwriting was carved on the back. 2005, love, Dad. She closed her hand around it and didn't let go. Miles away, in a quiet cabin near the edge of the river, Dan sat in a leather armchair, legs crossed, the fireplace flickering beside him. A glass of brandy in one hand. The snow outside fell slow and heavy, muting the world. No music played. No phone buzzed. Only peace. A real kind of peace, not silence built on lies, but the hard-earned kind that follows fire. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply was. Beside him sat a closed laptop, its screen black. A folder on the desktop labeled, Sent. In the fireplace, a ribbon of green twine curled into ash. Dan leaned back, took a sip of the brandy, and watched the flames dance. This year, they got exactly what they deserved. Not gifts, not forgiveness, just the truth, wrapped carefully, with names on every bough.
The champagne flute shattered in my hand before I realized I'd gripped it too tightly. The sound cut through the hum of conversation, and heads turned my way. Linda, my wife, threw me a sharp glare from across the room, muttering something to her friend Cheryl before making her way toward me. "Are you okay?" she hissed through gritted teeth, her smile tight, barely masking the irritation in her voice. "I'm fine," I said, wiping the blood from my palm with a napkin. But I wasn't. Not by a long shot. The words that triggered it were still replaying in my head. over and over again. Cheryl's voice, low but pointed, had carried through the laughter and clinking glasses. "You know, Zachary's got your charm, Linda," Cheryl had said, her wine glass raised. "But he sure doesn't have Brian's build." The pause before build was deliberate, her smirk lingering like she knew she'd struck a nerve. And Linda's response? She laughed. Not the kind of laugh you brush off as polite, but one that lingered too long, too loud. It wasn't just the laugh. It was the way she immediately looked away, avoiding my eyes, the way her hand tensed around her glass before she quickly loosened it. I knew that laugh. It wasn't joy, it was fear. The room was too loud, too warm, filled with too many people pretending they cared about our family's big day. My son Zachary had graduated at the top of his class, and this was supposed to be a celebration of his future. But all I could focus on was that single comment and the storm brewing behind it. Linda moved closer, her hand gripping my elbow. "Go wash your hand before you bleed all over the carpet. We'll talk later." Her voice was sugary sweet, but her eyes? Ice cold. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about the image. Our perfect little family hosting a perfect little party. I nodded and stepped away, heading toward the kitchen, but not before I caught Cheryl's gaze lingering on me. She winked, like we were in on some joke together. I stood at the sink, letting the cold water run over my hand, trying to shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. Something was wrong. The pieces didn't fit, but the edges were sharp enough to cut. Cheryl's comment, Linda's laugh, Zachary's face flashing in my mind. His bright blue eyes, his mop of dark curls. A thought I couldn't suppress clawed its way to the surface. Zachary didn't look like me. Not at all. I'd always brushed it off. People said he took after Linda's side of the family. But tonight, with that comment echoing in my ears, it didn't feel like an innocent observation anymore. I walked back into the party, plastering on a fake smile, but I didn't see the room the same way. Every glance felt conspiratorial. Every laugh seemed aimed at me. I caught Linda leaning close to Cheryl again, whispering something that made Cheryl snort into her wine. The rest of the night passed in a blur of forced conversations and polite applause as Zachary gave a short speech about how much he appreciated everyone's support. I didn't hear a word of it. I was too busy watching Linda, noticing the little things I'd ignored for years. The way she avoided my touch in front of others. How she deflected every genuine moment with a joke or a change of subject. When the last guest finally left, I found her in the kitchen, pouring herself another glass of wine. "Hell of a party," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She didn't look up. "You're welcome. You seemed awfully cozy with Cheryl tonight." That got her attention. She turned, leaning against the counter, her expression shifting from tired to annoyed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You tell me," I said, stepping closer, "because I'm starting to think there's a lot I don't know." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything. And that silence? It was louder than any scream. For the first time in years, I saw her for what she was. Calculated, guarded, and, worst of all, hiding something. The silence hung heavy between us, thick enough to choke on. Linda tilted her head, her lips curving into that faint smirk she always used when she wanted to put me in my place. It wasn't charming anymore. It was infuriating. "Are you seriously doing this tonight?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Because I'm not in the mood for one of your episodes." "Episodes," I repeated, my voice low, but I could feel the anger rising like a fire behind my ribs. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You're overthinking, as usual." She shrugged, taking a sip of her wine like we were discussing the weather. "Cheryl was just being Cheryl. You know how she is, always stirring the pot. Why are you letting her get to you?" She wasn't the one laughing like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. I shot back. Her smirk disappeared, replaced by a cold glare. "Maybe because it was funny, Brian. But of course you're too uptight to get a joke. You've always been that way." My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Do you think this is funny?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. "Because I don't." Cheryl's comment, your reaction. It wasn't just a joke. It was a slip. She rolled her eyes, setting her glass on the counter with a little too much force. "You're being ridiculous. You always want to turn nothing into a crisis. Maybe you should take a long look in the mirror and ask yourself why. I stepped closer, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear exactly, more like annoyance that I wasn't backing down. You're deflecting, I said. You always do that when you're caught. Caught? She laughed bitterly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Caught doing what, Brian? Hosting a party for our son while you skulk around acting paranoid. Is he my son? The words came out before I could stop them. They felt foreign, like they didn't belong to me, but once they were out, I couldn't take them back. Her face froze. For a split second, I saw something raw flash across her features. Guilt, panic, something she couldn't quite hide. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a look of mock outrage. I can't believe you just said that, she snapped. How dare you? Zachary is your son, Brian. How could you even question that? Because you gave me a reason to, I said, my voice hard now. And the way you're reacting isn't exactly reassuring. She crossed her arms, her posture shifting into full defense mode. You're unbelievable. All these years, I've put up with your moods, your endless hours at work, and this is how you repay me? Accusing me of what exactly? Cheating on you? Lying to you? You're disgusting. Maybe I am, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I can't ignore this. Not anymore. Not when I've spent 20 years building everything for a family that might not even be mine. Her face twisted into something cruel. You're pathetic, Brian. Always playing the victim. Maybe if you spent less time at the office and more time being a husband, you wouldn't feel the need to blame me for everything. It hit like a slap, but I refused to let her see it. Instead, I stepped back, nodding slowly as I let her words sink in. You know what? I said. I'm going to get the answers. And when I do, we'll see who's pathetic. She scoffed, turning away like she was done with the conversation. Go ahead, she muttered. Waste your time. You're good at that. I left the room before I said something I couldn't take back. But as I climbed the stairs, my chest tight with anger and something much darker, I knew I wasn't going to let this go. Cheryl's words, Linda's reaction, they were just the beginning. I didn't know where this would lead, but I was sure of one thing. The truth was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't just destroy her lies, it would destroy her. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was sulking or drowning in self-pity, but because I was planning. My mind worked like a machine, putting pieces together and mapping out my next steps. If Linda thought I'd let her dismiss me like that, she was sorely mistaken. The first thing I needed was proof. Not suspicions, not guesses, cold, hard facts. I got up before the sun rose, threw on a jacket, and drove to the pharmacy. They sold DNA test kits right next to the pregnancy tests and diet pills. I grabbed one, paid in cash to avoid any digital trail, and headed back home before anyone else was awake. Zachary was still in bed, recovering from the late-night celebration. I hesitated outside his door for a moment. My son, or maybe not my son, was just a kid, innocent in all this. But I had to know. Carefully, I opened the door and stepped inside. His graduation cap and gown were draped over a chair, his sneakers tossed carelessly on the floor. I moved quietly, my heart pounding in my chest as I found the glass of water he'd left on his nightstand. Perfect. A clean sample. Using the kit's instructions, I swabbed the rim and sealed the evidence. The whole process took less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. My hands were shaking by the time I finished. Linda's toothbrush was next. It sat there in the bathroom like a mocking grin. I clenched my jaw as I collected the second sample. She wouldn't even notice it was missing. She didn't pay enough attention to anything but herself. With both samples secured, I packed up the kit and drove to the nearest drop-off point. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I stared at the shipping box in my lap. Once I sent this off, there was no turning back. But I didn't hesitate. Whatever the truth was, I deserved to know it. Back home, the house was finally stirring. Linda was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She didn't even glance at me when I walked in. "Morning," she said, her tone clipped. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed a mug, poured myself some coffee, and sat across from her. She finally looked up, her eyebrows raised. "What's with the silent treatment?" "Just thinking," I said, staring at her over the rim of my mug. About the party last night. About Cheryl. Her jaw tightened, but she forced a laugh. Still on that? I told you, Cheryl's just an idiot who likes to stir drama. Don't give her the satisfaction. I'm not giving her anything, I said evenly. But you're giving me a lot to think about. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't take the bait. Well, don't think too hard. You might hurt yourself. She smirked, like she just scored some clever point in an argument I wasn't even having. I stood, keeping my expression neutral as I rinsed out my cup. Don't worry, I said, turning to leave. I'll find the answers soon enough. Her smirk faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. Good luck with that, she called after me. She had no idea how close I was to blowing her entire world apart. The results would take a week, maybe 2. In the meantime, I wasn't going to let her see me sweat. If Linda wanted to play games, I'd play and I'd win. But I wasn't just going to expose her lies. I was going to dismantle everything she thought she controlled, piece by piece. Starting now. The waiting was excruciating. Every day felt like a test of my patience. And Linda's behavior only poured fuel on the fire. She didn't know what I'd done, but her arrogance made me think she felt untouchable. She strutted around the house like she owned it, throwing passive-aggressive comments my way whenever she could. Are you going to fix the garage door? Or is that one of your long-term projects too? She quipped one evening. Don't worry, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've got bigger projects in the works. Her eyes flicked up from her wine glass, trying to gauge if I meant more than I said. But I'd mastered the poker face after years of running a business. She couldn't read me, and it drove her crazy. I could see it. Zachary, blissfully unaware of the tension, spent most of his time out with friends. I couldn't bring myself to look him in the eyes for too long. If the results came back the way I feared, how could I? He wasn't to blame, but every time I saw his face, the question clawed at me. The real breaking point came one afternoon when I overheard Linda on the phone. I'd come home early from work, hoping for a moment of quiet. Instead, her voice drifted through the living room, sharp and dismissive. No, Brian doesn't suspect a thing. He's too busy with his empire, she said, her tone laced with mockery. There was a pause, followed by a laugh that made my stomach churn. He'll never figure it out. He's too dense. I froze in the hallway, my hands curling into fists. The air felt thick, suffocating. She was laughing at me, mocking me. I stepped closer, careful not to make a sound, as she continued. Zachary? He's fine. He doesn't know either. And honestly, why would I tell him? It's not like it matters. Brian's been a good enough provider. Why mess that up? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart pounded in my chest, my breathing shallow as I struggled to process her words. She knew. She'd known all along, and she'd lied to me for years, decades, while reaping the benefits of my hard work. Anyway, I've got to go, she said, her tone suddenly sweeter. Brian's due home soon, and I don't need him hovering. Talk later. She hung up, and I stepped back, retreating to the front door and making enough noise to announce my arrival. When I walked into the living room, she greeted me with her usual fake smile. You're home early, she said, feigning interest. Thought I'd surprise you, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. How's your day been? She shrugged. The usual. Nothing exciting. I forced a smile, nodding. Good to hear. Inside, I was boiling. The audacity, the complete lack of remorse. It took everything I had not to confront her right then and there. But I knew better. She was too smooth, too quick with her excuses. If I went in unarmed, she'd twist the situation and make it my fault. No, I needed those DNA results first. I needed irrefutable proof. Only then would I strike, and when I did, I'd make sure Linda regretted every smug word, every lie, every ounce of disrespect she'd shown me. The pieces were falling into place. All I had to do was wait a little longer. But Linda had no idea she was standing on the edge of a cliff. And when the time came, I'd be the one to push her off. The email came on a Tuesday morning. I remember because the weather was unseasonably warm for late spring, and the birds were chirping outside my office window, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. The subject line read, Your DNA test results are ready. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The bold letters jumped out at me like a slap to the face. Probability of paternity. 0%. 0. Not 99.9. Not even a shred of doubt to cling to. Just 0. I stared at the screen, my mind going blank. 20 years. 2 decades of sacrifices, long hours, and sleepless nights building a life for a family that wasn't mine. The betrayal hit harder than I thought possible. But it wasn't sadness that filled me. It was rage, pure, focused rage. I stood, pacing the room, trying to calm the inferno roaring inside me. Every laugh, every touch, every "I love you" from Linda felt like poison now. The worst part was the clarity. This wasn't an accident. This was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. She had looked me in the eyes every day for 20 years, knowing the truth, and still let me pour my life into a lie. I called my lawyer that afternoon. "Brian," he said after I explained the situation. "This is heavy. What do you want to do?" "I want to make sure she gets nothing," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "I've built everything. She's not walking away with it." "Understood. Do you have evidence?" "I will soon," I said. "Just be ready." After hanging up, I sat at my desk, staring at the blueprints scattered across it. My company had built half the homes in this town. Every brick, every beam, every ounce of labor. It was my legacy. And Linda thought she could just take it? No, not a chance. That night, I came home earlier than usual. Linda was sitting in the living room, scrolling on her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "You're home early again," she said casually, sipping her wine. "Had a light day," I replied, setting my briefcase down. I sat across from her, watching her every move. She was so comfortable, so sure of herself, that it almost made me laugh. "Zach's out with friends," she said, glancing up at me. "You could have texted. I'd have made something nice for dinner." "Oh, don't worry," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "We'll have plenty to talk about soon enough." She raised an eyebrow, setting her phone down. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just thinking about the future," I said, standing up. "It's going to be different." Her expression faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. "You're acting weird again. Is this about Cheryl's stupid comment? I thought we were over that." "I'm over a lot of things," I replied, heading upstairs before she could press further. In my office, I opened my laptop and started going through every file, every financial document tied to the company. I had built it all under my name, but Linda had tried to weasel her way into joint ownership years ago. Thankfully, I'd refused back then, chalking it up to good business sense. Now, it felt like divine intervention. The plan was coming together. Linda had stolen my trust, my years, my peace of mind, but she'd never take what I built. And as for Zachary, he didn't deserve this mess, but he deserved the truth. That part would come later. First, I had to deal with her. She thought she'd won, that I was too blind to see her lies. But Linda had no idea what was coming. And when it hit, it would bring her entire house of cards crashing down. One brick at a time. The next step was simple. Bait the trap. Linda thrived on control. She loved being the one holding the reins, even if it meant twisting the truth to keep others in line. But now I was flipping the script. I would let her think she was still the puppet master while quietly cutting the strings. That Friday, I proposed a family dinner. Zachary had just finished up his summer job orientation, and Linda couldn't resist the chance to play doting wife and mother in public. We went to one of the nicer restaurants downtown, the kind of place where they dim the lights just enough to make it feel expensive. The evening started off harmless enough. Zachary talked about his plans for college. Linda chimed in with fake enthusiasm, and I smiled and nodded, playing my part. But underneath the surface, I was watching her every move, noting every detail. She was in her element, charming Zachary with her stories, laughing a little too loud at her own jokes. But her eyes darted to her phone more than once, and every time she did, I caught the faintest flicker of tension in her face. Whoever was on the other end of those texts had her attention, and I was determined to find out who. As dessert arrived, I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice casual. "Linda, you've been glued to that phone all night. Work stuff." She froze for a fraction of a second before slipping her phone into her purse with a practiced smile. "Just some messages from Cheryl," she said smoothly. "She's planning a weekend trip and wanted advice." "Cheryl?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Funny. She didn't strike me as the weekend trip type. She always seemed more spontaneous. Linda's eyes narrowed, but she recovered quickly, turning her attention to Zachary. "Your father's always been a little suspicious of people, hasn't he?" she said with a laugh. "Cheryl's harmless, Brian. You need to stop letting her comments get under your skin." I didn't respond, just kept my gaze steady on her. The silence stretched just long enough to make her uncomfortable before I finally nodded. "You're right. Cheryl's harmless." She relaxed a little too quickly, her smile returning. But Zachary, bless him, was too busy scrolling through his own phone to notice the tension crackling between us. When we got home, Linda retreated to the bedroom, claiming she had a headache. I gave her enough time to get comfortable before slipping downstairs to her office. Linda wasn't careless, but she was predictable. She thought she had everything under control, so she rarely bothered to cover her tracks. Sure enough, her laptop was open on the desk, her email logged in. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the touchpad. This was crossing a line, no doubt about it. But then I remembered her voice on the phone, the smugness when she said I'd never figure it out. The line had already been crossed by her. I was just catching up. Her inbox was mostly clutter, receipts, promotions, the usual junk. But there, buried 3 emails deep, was a name I didn't recognize. James M. The subject line read, "Next weekend?" I opened it and my stomach turned. The message was short but damning. "Linda, I can't stop thinking about last weekend. I'll book the same place. Text me when you're free. Can't wait to see you. Jay." The bile rose in my throat, but I forced myself to keep going. I scrolled further, finding email after email confirming what I already suspected. Linda hadn't just been lying to me about Zachary. She'd been lying about everything. And this James wasn't a one-time fling. He was a long-term arrangement. I copied the emails, every single one, and forwarded them to my private account. The evidence was stacking up, and the picture was getting clearer. She wasn't just disloyal. She was brazen about it, confident I'd never find out. She was wrong, so very wrong. When I finally crawled into bed that night, Linda was already asleep, her face serene in the dim light. It was almost laughable how peaceful she looked, completely unaware of the storm brewing beside her. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of my next move pressing down on me. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she'd won. But I wasn't the man she took me for, not anymore. The game was on, and Linda didn't even realize she'd already lost. The morning after my discovery, I felt calm. Not the kind of calm that comes with peace, but the kind born of purpose. Everything was clear now. Linda's betrayal wasn't just some passing mistake. It was a lifestyle, one she had been living at my expense for years. And James? He was just the latest in a line of hidden truths I was uncovering. But now it was my turn to act. I started small, testing the waters. Over breakfast, Linda was her usual smug self, sipping her coffee and scrolling her phone like she hadn't a care in the world. Zachary was already out, leaving just the 2 of us in the quiet kitchen. "You've been busy lately?" I said casually, buttering a piece of toast. She didn't look up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just an observation," I replied, taking a bite and shrugging. "You've had a lot of plans with Cheryl. Seems like she's keeping you on your toes." That got her attention. Her eyes flicked up, narrowing slightly, but her smile didn't waver. "Cheryl's been going through some stuff. I'm just being a good friend." "Of course," I said, nodding. "You're always so thoughtful." Her gaze lingered on me, searching for cracks, but I gave her nothing. After a moment, she went back to her phone, dismissing me like I was the help. Perfect. She didn't see the tidal wave coming. Later that day, I called my lawyer again. I outlined everything I had. The emails, the DNA results, the years of financial manipulation she tried to weave into my business. He listened in silence before speaking. "Brian, this is ironclad," he said. "But you need to be smart about how you move forward. What's your goal here?" "Divorce is inevitable," I said. "But not yet. First, I need her to feel the consequences. Consequences? He asked, his tone cautious. How far are you planning to take this? As far as it needs to go, I said simply. The next step in my plan was the house. Linda thought everything we owned was untouchable, that she had her claws in enough to stake her claim. But I had one advantage she didn't know about. The property wasn't just in my name. It was also under my company. A little legal maneuvering, and I could strip it from her grasp without her ever seeing it coming. By Friday, the paperwork was in motion. It would take a few weeks to finalize, but once it was done, Linda wouldn't even be able to keep the roof over her head without my say-so. The best part? She had no idea. I went about my days like nothing had changed, smiling, nodding, letting her believe she was still the queen of her little empire. That evening, as I sat on the patio, sipping a drink and staring out at the yard I'd spent years perfecting, Linda joined me. She brought a glass of wine and that fake smile I'd grown to despise. "You've been so quiet lately," she said, sitting beside me. "Everything okay?" I took a sip, letting the silence hang just long enough to unsettle her. "Everything's fine," I said, "just thinking about how much I've built." She tilted her head, her smile faltering. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I replied, setting my glass down. "Just appreciating how far I've come, how much I've provided." Her eyes narrowed, but she quickly masked it with a laugh. "You're acting strange, Brian. Maybe you need a hobby. Maybe," I said, standing and stretching, "or maybe I'm just finally seeing things clearly." Before she could respond, I walked back inside, leaving her alone on the patio. I didn't need to argue or explain myself. I didn't need her approval. For years, she'd played her game, weaving her web of lies and manipulation. Now it was my turn. And the best part? She didn't even realize the walls were closing in. Every piece was falling into place. And soon, Linda's carefully constructed world would come crashing down around her. All I had to do was keep pushing, one move at a time, one brick at a time. The breaking point came faster than I expected. By midweek, Linda had started to sense that something wasn't right. Her usual smug confidence began to crack, though she tried to hide it behind her usual jabs and dismissive remarks. But I could see the subtle changes. The way she checked her phone more often, the way her eyes lingered on me when she thought I wasn't looking. She was starting to feel it, even if she didn't know what it was. The trap was set, and now I just needed to tighten it. I decided to accelerate things. I called Zachary and asked him to come home for dinner that evening. "Family time," I told him. "There's something important I want to discuss." Linda didn't ask what it was about. She pretended not to care, brushing it off with a wave of her hand and a sarcastic remark about my sudden interest in family bonding. But her eyes betrayed her. She was nervous. That evening, as we sat around the dining table, I made my move. So, I started, setting my fork down and looking between Zachary and Linda. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about us, about the future." Zachary looked up from his plate, curious. Linda, on the other hand, froze mid-bite. "Oh?" she said, forcing a casual tone. "What brought this on?" "Life has a way of showing you things when you least expect it," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Sometimes, you learn truths you weren't looking for." Linda's smile wavered, but she quickly recovered. "That sounds philosophical." "More practical than philosophical," I replied. "Like when you hear something that doesn't sit right, and you decide to dig a little deeper." Her face paled slightly, but she kept her composure. "Brian, if you've got something to say, just say it. Stop with the theatrics." I looked at Zachary, who was watching us both with wide eyes. "Zach," I said gently, "you know I've always loved you, right? No matter what." He frowned, glancing between me and Linda. "Of course, Dad. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I did something recently, something I didn't want to do but felt I had to. I ordered a DNA test." The room went still. Linda's fork clattered onto her plate, her face a mask of shock and fury. "You what?" she hissed. "I tested Zachary's DNA," I said calmly. My eyes locked on hers. "And mine." Zachary blinked, his confusion turning to alarm. "What are you talking about? Why would you?" "Because," I said, cutting him off gently. I needed to know the truth. Linda stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane, she snapped, her voice rising. How dare you do something like that without talking to me first? How dare I? I repeated, my voice growing sharper. How dare you, Linda? How dare you lie to me for 20 years? Her face twisted with anger, but I saw the panic in her eyes. You're delusional. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice cold now. The results came back, Linda. 0%. Zachary isn't my son. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Zachary's face turned white as he turned to Linda. Mom? What is he talking about? Linda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked truly cornered. I gave you everything, I said, my voice shaking with controlled rage. My time, my effort, my loyalty, and you threw it all away. For what? To keep up this sick charade. Brian, she started, but I didn't let her finish. Save it, I snapped. I've seen the emails. I know about James. I know everything. Zachary's chair scraped back as he stood, his face a mixture of shock and betrayal. James? Who the hell is James? Linda reached for him, but he pulled away. Zach, I can explain. No, I said firmly, standing as well. You don't get to explain. Not this time. This is your mess, Linda. You made it, and now you get to live with the consequences. Linda's eyes darted between me and Zachary, desperate now. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, my voice deadly calm. You've been lying to me for 20 years. You've been lying to him. And now, it's over. I turned to Zachary, my heart breaking at the look on his face. You didn't deserve this, I said softly. You're not to blame for any of it. He nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. I need some air, he muttered, storming out the door before either of us could stop him. Linda sank back into her chair, her bravado completely gone. Brian, please, she said, her voice trembling. We can fix this. We can. No, I said, cutting her off. There's no fixing this. You don't get to destroy everything I've built and walk away unscathed. This is just the beginning, Linda. You're going to feel every ounce of what you've done. And when I'm done, you'll have nothing. Her eyes widened, but I didn't wait for her response. I walked out, leaving her alone at the table, her lies finally laid bare. The house was silent when I returned later that night. Zachary's car was gone, and Linda was nowhere to be found. Good. I didn't want to see either of them, not yet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Zachary. Staying at a friend's. Need time to think. I stared at the screen for a moment, torn between relief that he was safe and heartbreak that he was caught in this mess. He deserved better. And as much as it killed me to admit it, he needed to know the truth. Not just about me, but about Linda. But tonight wasn't about Zachary. It was about her. It was about setting the stage for the reckoning she never saw coming. I went straight to my office, pulling up the documents my lawyer had prepared. The property transfer was nearly complete. In a matter of days, the house and everything tied to it would be in my company's name, completely out of Linda's reach. The financial accounts were already locked down. I had frozen her access to every joint account and restructured the business assets to ensure she wouldn't see a dime without a fight. And James? I hadn't forgotten about him. A quick search through Linda's email had given me more than enough to work with. His full name, his workplace, and a trail of messages so incriminating they might as well have been love letters. I'd forwarded them all to my lawyer, just in case Linda thought she could get clever in court. By the time Linda returned, it was well past midnight. I heard her heels clicking against the tile as she stumbled through the door. The smell of wine hit me before she did. She wasn't drunk. Linda never let herself lose that much control, but she definitely had more than her usual share. You're still up, she said, leaning against the doorway to my office. Her tone was tired but still carried that edge of defiance she couldn't seem to let go of. Couldn't sleep? I replied, not looking up from my computer. She sighed, stepping into the room. Brian, we need to talk. I agree, I said, finally meeting her gaze. But not tonight. Her brow furrowed. This is ridiculous. You've blown everything out of proportion. We can fix this, Brian. We can. Stop, I said sharply, standing. You don't get to pretend anymore. Not after what you've done. Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an argument, a way to spin this back in her favor. You're acting like this is all my fault, she said, her voice rising. Do you even hear yourself? You're not a saint, Brian. You've been married to your job for 20 years. I've been holding this family together while I what? I interrupted, stepping closer. Built a business that paid for this house? That put food on the table? That gave you every luxury you ever wanted? Don't you dare twist this around, Linda. You had everything, and you threw it away. Her face flushed with anger, but she didn't back down. You think you're so perfect, she spat. But you're not. You're controlling, obsessive, and you've never once considered what I wanted. I laughed, the sound bitter and cold. What you wanted? Was it James? Or was it just the thrill of lying to my face every day? Her eyes widened, and for the first time, she was speechless. Yeah, I said, my voice dropping. I know all about him. The emails, the weekends, the lies. It's all in black and white, Linda. There's no denying it. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. Fine. You want the truth? You've got it. James made me feel alive, Brian. Something you haven't done in years. Her words hit like a punch, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled. A cold, deliberate smile that made her falter. Thank you, I said quietly. She blinked. What? For finally admitting what I already knew, I said. You see, Linda, this isn't about James. It's about you. About the person you've become, or maybe the person you always were. But it doesn't matter anymore, because everything you thought you had, it's gone. Her face twisted in confusion. What are you talking about? You'll find out soon enough, I said, brushing past her on my way out of the room. Enjoy what's left while you can, because the next time we talk, Linda, it won't be a conversation. It'll be a conclusion. I left her standing there, her confidence finally cracking as the weight of my words sank in. She still thought she had some control, some way to claw her way out of this. But she didn't. By the time I was done, Linda wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose everything. The fallout began the next morning. Linda woke to a house that was no longer hers in any meaningful way. The first blow landed when she tried to use her debit card for her usual extravagant breakfast order, only to find her account frozen. She stormed into the kitchen, her face flushed with anger. What the hell, Brian? She snapped, waving her phone. My card isn't working. I looked up from my coffee, calm as ever. I know. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean, you know? I froze the accounts, I said simply, setting my mug down. Effective yesterday. Her jaw dropped, but she recovered quickly, her voice rising. You can't do that. That's our money. No, I said, standing to face her. It's my money, and it's already been redistributed. You have nothing in your name now, Linda. Her face twisted in rage, but I could see the panic creeping in behind it. This is illegal. You can't just. It's perfectly legal, I interrupted, my tone icy. The accounts were joint, but the funds came from my business. And since your name isn't on the company, you're entitled to exactly nothing. I've already spoken to my lawyer. You can fight it if you want, but you'll lose. Her hands trembled as she stared at me, her mask of confidence slipping for the first time. You're really doing this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I said, and I'm just getting started. The second blow came when she tried to use the house as leverage. By mid-afternoon, she had called her own lawyer, desperate to regain some control. But when they contacted mine, they got the news she hadn't been prepared for. The house was no longer in her name, or even mine. It was officially a business asset, tied up in my company's holdings. She couldn't touch it. I came home that evening to find her sitting in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand and fury in her eyes. You think you've won, she said, her voice cold. But you haven't. You're just proving how pathetic you really are. Is that so? I asked, setting my briefcase down. Enlighten me, Linda. What exactly have I lost? You've destroyed this family, she hissed, standing to face me. Zachary will never forgive you for this. And neither will I. I chuckled, shaking my head. You're still clinging to that fantasy, aren't you? That I care what you think. That I need your forgiveness. I don't, Linda. Not anymore. Her face twisted with rage, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. I stepped closer, towering over her now, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. You destroyed this family the moment you decided to lie to me. The moment you decided to make me the fool while you played house with someone else. Zachary might hate me for a while, but at least I gave him the truth. You gave him lies. And now you get to live with the consequences. She threw her wine glass at the wall, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the room. You bastard! She screamed. You can't do this to me. I didn't flinch. I already have. I turned and walked away, leaving her to stew in the wreckage she had created. Upstairs, I found Zachary in his room, staring out the window. He turned when I knocked lightly on the door. Hey, I said, stepping inside. Can we talk? He nodded, his expression guarded but curious. Yeah. I sat on the edge of his bed, taking a deep breath. I know this has been a lot, and I know you probably hate me for dragging you into it. I don't hate you, he said quietly. I just don't know what to think. Fair enough, I said. But I need you to know one thing. None of this is your fault. I don't care what the DNA says. You're my son, Zach. Always have been, always will be. His eyes softened, and for the first time in days, I saw a glimmer of the kid I'd raised. Thanks, Dad, he said. I needed to hear that. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging between us. But I knew we'd get through it together. Linda, on the other hand, wasn't my problem anymore. She had made her bed, and now she could lie in it, alone. The final act of my quiet revenge came swiftly and without warning, just as I'd planned. Linda's arrogance had been her greatest weapon for years, but now it was her downfall. She thought she could intimidate, manipulate, and control her way out of the situation. She was wrong. The morning of our last confrontation, she woke to find an envelope on the dining table. Inside were the divorce papers already signed on my end. I'd had them prepared weeks ago, waiting for the right moment. Along with them was a printout of her emails with James, a copy of the DNA results, and a list of all the assets she no longer had access to. When I walked into the room, she was staring at the papers, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. You're really doing this? She said, her voice low and venomous. After everything I've done for this family, for you. I folded my arms, leaning against the doorway. What you've done? You mean lying, cheating, and stealing from me for 20 years? Yeah, Linda, I'm really doing this. She stood, the papers trembling in her hands. You think this makes you strong? It doesn't. It makes you a coward. A bitter, pathetic little man. I smiled. A cold, calculated smile that I knew would unsettle her. Call me what you want, Linda. I don't care. Because at the end of the day, I have the truth. And I have my freedom. You've got nothing. Her eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't respond. She knew I was right. Everything she had built her life around, her lies, her illusions of control, was gone. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. You won't win, she spat, clutching the papers to her chest. You think this is over, but it's not. Oh, it's over, I said, stepping closer. It was over the moment you decided I wasn't worth the truth. Now you get to live with the consequences. I walked past her, heading for the door, but before I left, I turned back one last time. And for the record, Linda, you'll never be welcome in this house again. It's not yours anymore. It never was. Her face crumpled for just a moment, but she quickly masked it with anger. Go to hell, Brian. See you there, I said calmly, before walking out the door. The divorce was finalized within a month. Linda fought tooth and nail to get something out of me, but my lawyer was relentless, and the evidence I had collected left her with no ground to stand on. She walked away with nothing but her pride, and even that was in tatters. As for Zachary, our relationship wasn't the same, but it was mending. He chose to stay with me after the dust settled, and though it would take time, I could see he was starting to understand that I had acted out of love, not malice. And me? I felt free for the first time in decades. The weight of Linda's betrayal, her lies, and her manipulation had been lifted, and I could finally breathe again. I poured my energy back into my business, into rebuilding my life on my own terms. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that the truth always comes out, no matter how deeply it's buried. And when it does, it has the power to destroy or set you free. For me, it did both. But in the end, freedom was worth every brick I had to tear down to get there. To anyone out there in a similar situation, trust your instincts. Don't let anyone gaslight you into doubting what you know in your gut. And when the time comes to act, do it with precision. Let your actions speak louder than their lies. Because revenge isn't just about winning, it's about taking back control. And I've never felt more in control in my entire life.